Welcome to Sam Outside. I'm Sam, and I'm outside spending some time in a forest. That's right. Uh, Spending time in a forest, specifically walking through a forest, preferably a mixed forest, has some evidence based benefits. It does change us as humans physiologically. It has to do with our ancient brain perceiving those other living things through our senses in a natural environment, in a forest. So basically, the more biodiversity, the greater range of other living things, the greater the benefits compared to what the human brain is affected by when it is immersed, challenged in a very urban setting, specifically in a city center. It has to do with the geometry, it has to do with the sounds, it has to do with the frequencies, it has to do with smells. All those things represent and they're perceived as threats, dangerous. It puts our body in a state of alertness. All right. Basically, we're running in a state of our sympathetic nervous system is continually engaged. And what that does is it keeps our cortisol production at an all-time high, which affects things like focus and our mood and our memory and our blood pressure and our heart rate and our digestion, our metabolism, our impulse control, all of those things. So if we could spend 20 minutes walking in a mixed forest, we greatly reduce, after 20 minutes to a half hour, we greatly reduce the amount of cortisol. All right. So just within the first 20 minutes, you've lowered it by more than 20%. And you don't really get much more after that half hour to 40 minutes. So you want to get right in there. So there are some chemical effects that happen in the human body. And it's got more specifically to do, and I mentioned the mixed forest, got specifically to do with coniferous trees. Coniferous trees, meaning cone bearing, they're evergreen. And they're green because they are still active. They are still participating in the process of energy conversion from solar energy, creating sugars. And the byproduct of that, of course, is water vapor and, more importantly, oxygen. Right? So they do filter, they sequester carbon. So despite it being, below freezing right now, the fact that they're green and the fact that there's sunlight, there is, albeit slow, some conversion of energy that's happening. So the byproduct of photosynthesis is trace amounts of water vapor on the air. And it's on that air that we have phytoncides. All right. Those are volatile chemicals. Those are the byproduct. And they are basically a means of communication for the trees at this point when there's no activity happening in the soil. So when I've got a small tree like this is a balsam fir, right? Fairly flat needles that come across. They're relatively flat out of the stem like that. Very, very sweet smell, and not too unlike this eastern hemlock right here, which again has shorter needles, more of a silver hue on the backside. They also come out either side of the stem, but again, lying rather flat. In contrast, let's say a spruce, which would have those short needles, but they would come out all the way around the stem. And we've got a number of pines in our forest as well. This is an eastern white pine. Easy way to identify that is that the needle cluster comes out from the stem, and each cluster of needles has 5. So WHITE. All right. So we've got 5 needles in a cluster. That WHITE, 5 letters, white, that's a white pine. All of these trees, the more diverse my forest is, the greater amount of access to phytoncides. And those phytoncides connect to their body's own immune system, more specifically the NK cells, natural killer cells that are targeting cells that are stressed or damaged or infected or mutated. All right, so anything that's in a tumor or in a scar or in a cancer. One of my favorites is this cedar tree. Now, the cedar tree specifically, as a coniferous tree, is more of an ancient tree. As far as trees grows, this plant, in terms of its leaves, and it's not really fair to call them leaves, call them scales. They've got actually more in common with things like grasses and ferns than they do other trees, very ancient species. And for that, every part of it, it's also known as the mother tree, every part of it has some antibacterial, antimicrobial aspect to it, from the roots to the sap, to the inner bark, the pith, to the outer bark, right through to the fronds and even the seeds. So it is a staple for woodland creatures, and it is what the deer and the moose will sustain themselves on in this mixed forest because of the vitamin C that these small bits contain. So the forest itself, 20 minutes, reducing cortisol, and the fact that I'm moving and walking in nature, and I'm observing, I'm smelling, I'm noticing, I'm feeling. And as I'm navigating the landscape, I've got some lateral eye movement. My eyes are scanning left to right, left to right. My senses are immersed, but that activity of my eyes moving left to right, also changes my ability to focus. It heightens it because I'm engaging both hemispheres of the brain, the right and the left, the logical and the emotional. All right. So if I'm in an emotional state, I need to engage the other side of the brain. And if I'm too focused on something and I'm trying to make sense of it, then I've got to get the brain to go the other way and engage the other hemisphere. So walking in nature automatically gets us looking up and looking down. And yeah, of course, it's always good to look behind as well. All right. So the fact that I'm moving, getting some exercise, it's good for my heart, my respiratory system, my circulatory system. And if I can do it within 10, 15 minutes of eating, greatly improving my digestion, my metabolic rate changes when I walk after I eat. But it's exercise, so it's good for my legs, especially when I'm breaking trail through this snow. So yeah, 20 minutes a couple times a week is a great way to support physical, mental, and emotional health. The emotional health, I'm talking about how we relate to ourselves, other living things. Mental health in terms of how nature provides focus, it affects memory, and engages both hemispheres of the brain. And then physically, as we have access to phytoncides, access to fresh air, and sunlight, vitamin D, and also the cardiovascular and the strength training that goes along with the low impact active walking. So 20 minutes, and if you can do 2 hours a week, that's amazing. But start by going outside, right? So despite where you work, where you live, you might need to get on a bus, subway, maybe an Uber. Just go to a park. But if that is not possible, if you're not as fortunate as I am to have access to forests, acres and acres of untouched land, there are studies that show that simply looking at images of trees help. Just by purchasing some essential oils and having access to those nature smells, that helps, right? The sound of songbirds, the sounds of water really help. They know this because they study the effects of healing time and pain medications for patients recovering from surgery. And the gains are amazing relative to the healthcare industry when they've got patients who have access to a window, who have access to images of trees, the sound of birds and water, and the smell of trees as well. All right. So not being immersed in nature, but having access to that sensory stimulus, the natural world, reduces the amount of pain medications, increases recovery time, and that does have a financial impact on all of society. And the same studies are done on students. So if we can have greens and browns in classrooms and have plants and have images of trees and other wildlife, we can have the smells of nature and the sounds of nature, birds and water, students can focus, students can learn, greatly improved versus what we might typically feel as the industrial white, beige, and gray and concrete of an educational institution. So the studies are out there, and they're done all over the world every day, and we're seeing the results. So going outside is amazing, but taking nature and bringing all of those sensory experiences heal. If we can't get outside, bring outside inside, and it helps. So please go outside. It's so good for you. All right. Thanks very much for watching. I appreciate you. I appreciate your time and your support. I'll talk to you again real soon. Bye-bye.